this person who committed fraud, or this person who's just kind of not paying attention to being negligent. I don't want to be grown up. I don't want it to be my responsibility. We need a government to do it. But if you set out a scenario in which there isn't that, suddenly a lot of people, for the first time in their lives, think and act like responsible adults. They don't go to the stupidest solution to every problem, which is government violence. They think about it in terms of, all right, we're all just people. What do we do about this? And then you start talking and you start communicating. It's like the teacher left the room and never came back. Ooh, crap. Now we have to figure out what the hell we're doing. Like people. And so, for example, I'll do these little exercises and have the group talking about it. And somewhere in there, I'll throw in a suggestion of the government solution, and it's so stupid that every time, literally, people laugh at it. I say, we're figuring out how to deal with, well, what about, water? We know to go collect water, or building huts, or protecting against the thief, or whatever it is. And I say, well, how about we just choose one person, and we decide that he tells the rest of us what to do, and we have to obey, and he has the right to hurt us if we don't. We can go, no. What kind of stupid suggestion is that? It's the suggestion that 99% of the world uses to solve 99% of the world's problems. Because they were taught that that's sane. They were taught it's necessary. They were taught that it's legitimate, and it's utterly lunatic. And they only believe that because of the indoctrination. And again, you can watch their brains dance around to try to ignore things that they already actually know. One is they will talk about, well, people, when you suggest a society that doesn't have a ruling class, they'll say, well, people are naturally pack animals, and they work together, and we organize, and we form hierarchies, and we find consensus and stuff. And I'm like, yeah? Well, that's government. No, it freaking isn't. And you know it freaking isn't. You know it has nothing to do with consensus, but the statist will reinforce the lie he was taught to make himself feel better about it. To make it so he can actually imagine that working together and organizing and cooperation is government. And it takes 3 questions to say, okay, so government says you have to give us some money for this bridge that goes nowhere. What happens if you disobey? And then suddenly they face the fact that it's violent. They know it. Part of them knows it's violence from the very beginning, but they don't want to admit it. They don't want to see it. So the way they describe it is repeating the propaganda they were taught. And what we do in Candles in the Dark is to try to get them to see that, no, you actually know what it really is. And the reason you describe it in the fluffy and accurate way is because the literal reality makes you uncomfortable. And it's very important and it's very good that that is the case, because it shows that it doesn't match the moral code of the vast majority of human beings. They don't want to say it out loud. One of the main things we focus on in Candles in the Dark when talking to somebody is, don't talk in abstract, vague policy fluff. Make it literal and specific and personal. Don't say, well, I think guns should be restricted to those who blah, blah, blah. All right, that's nice. If I have a gun and the government says I'm not allowed to, I didn't threaten anyone, I didn't hurt anyone, but I still have one. They say I'm not allowed to, and I still do. What do you advocate be done to me? And they will immediately become uncomfortable, and their brain will immediately jump to something, well, there have to be consequences for breaking the law, and if you break the law, they'll arrest you. I'm aware of that. That's not what I asked. I didn't ask what would happen to me. I asked what you want to happen to me. What do you advocate happen to me? And the fact that statists so often flounder around and don't want to say it out loud is because they know it's wrong. Their conscience tells them it's wrong. They don't want to admit what they suddenly realize they have been cheering for. And again, that is a very good sign, because that's what we have to feed and nurture and bring out of them. The part of you that feels bad about admitting what government is, that's called a voluntarist. The crap you were taught on top of that, that is what has to be done away with. Because what almost everybody really is deep down inside is a voluntarist. Such that my original silly back and forth, everyone would think that's ridiculous. Nobody would ever do that, even though statists really do argue something that is that ridiculous, especially when it comes to protection. We need a giant thieving thug to protect us from thieving thugs. People try to hide from themselves beliefs that make them uncomfortable. And the more you can bring it out of them, the more you can make them reconsider what they are actually condoning, the better chance there is that they will choose the morality that is inside them over the indoctrination that somebody else has smashed in their heads. And it's very important to keep that in your mind when talking to them. That all these people, the vast majority, even if they're out there vociferously demanding this or that authoritarian injustice, they are also victims of this lie. They are victims of the authoritarian garbage that says, well, we need this, and it's righteous if it's law. And it's very easy to forget that, especially if they're advocating something like profoundly evil, like the war on drugs. Lots of people have habits we don't like. Let's send SWAT teams through the front door and maybe shoot them or put them in a cage. That's insane and evil. And the only reason anybody advocates it is because they were taught that, well, if you do it by law and legislation and by authority, then it's perfectly okay. But they don't like to be specific and they don't like to be literal because their moral code tells them that's wrong. In their view of reality, they talk in the same fluff they were taught. For example, the concept of laws. They have this vague notion in their head, we need law. Well, what does that mean? Why do we need it? Well, people, we don't want people running around robbing and killing each other. I agree. I don't want that either. And by the way, most people who do that because law told them to do it. But we don't want that. And they think there's some magical, mystical thing that isn't really people that's going to keep all us mere humans in line and make us not do that. Again, this is something that they understand and they don't understand at the same time. Because if you ask them, well, what is government? Well, it's the representative. Eventually they'll say, well, it's people, and their laws are they're just issuing commands, and people with guns hurt people who disobey. You can walk them through questions and show that they already knew that, but they don't think that way, and they don't feel that way, and they don't perceive it that way. They perceive it as something fundamentally different. But getting back to the fact that people naturally have way better solutions than government ever does. First of all, way more moral solutions, because they don't start with, let's have a big violent thug. But also more practical solutions and solutions that actually work. Because if people are looking at a problem and they actually, we don't want to be victimized by the thief, or we don't want poor people starving to death, we want to help them out. It starts with good intentions. And if you don't add violence, there's nothing to corrupt. Power corrupts. A lack of power doesn't corrupt. So it's the whole notion of the ring of power of, well, if you put me in charge, I'll do good things with it. And gee, why does that always go in the wrong direction? Whereas if people realize, I'm just the boss over me and you're just the boss over you, and same is true of everybody else, so that when we address these problems and we don't start with the template of authoritarian power, we don't want innocent people to suffer. Duh. That's true of the vast majority of people. And so when people talk, well, what if there were just gangs and they'd have shootouts and blah, 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 blah. When people picture a reality without government and they start to imagine that would mean that we're just all going to be violent animals, it's utterly ridiculous. We'll take the example of protection. Right now, most of what law enforcers do is rob or cage people for victimless crimes. In other words, they start a fight and steal people's money and put them in cages. That is the vast majority of what law enforcers do. Now, in the movies and on TV, they pretend that what they do is bravely chase down the bad guys. Every once in a blue moon, they'll catch an actual bad guy and maybe you can stop it. Well, they rarely stop it in the process. All right, we'll put you in a cage. and then, by the way, we'll rob a bunch of people to give you free room and board for having murdered someone. It's like, okay, you can't really get a worse solution than that. But normal people wouldn't do that. And if somebody is accused of doing something bad, at least the thoughtful people would like, if he really did that, like, I want something to stop him from doing that. However, I also want to make sure he really did that before he gets punished. I don't want to just, well, somebody said that, somebody said that, somebody said he did something bad. We have built within us, when we're trying to be moral human beings, the only checks and balances that do any good. Like, I'm angry, but I want to be fair. And I'm outraged at this thing I heard about, but I want to pause for a minute and make sure it's actually like, that I actually know what's going on. And, you know, obviously people aren't always completely careful with that. But when you add power and imaginary authority to that carelessness, you don't just get, whoop, somebody got beat up because of a rumor or somebody spent a lie. You get literally hundreds of millions of people dying. And when you can look at history like that and still have so many people say, without government there would be chaos and death and mayhem. Open a history book. With government, there's literally been hundreds of millions of people dying from their own government. But people are, again, it's about being trained to think like children, where the thought of being in that classroom and the teacher leaves and you don't know what to do, the thought of freedom is scarier to them than the thought of being subjugated by somebody else who's in charge. All I have to do is obey them and everything will be okay. Never mind that, no, it won't be okay. It won't be anywhere near okay. It'll be as not okay as you can possibly get. And you look up all the least okay things that have ever happened in the history of the world were almost always a direct result of an authority giving an evil command and a bunch of statists obeying it and implementing it and enforcing it. And yet people still have this childish mentality that says, you know, that this classroom would be chaos if we didn't all listen to the teacher. What if you grow up and listen to your conscience instead, and that doesn't occur to most people? But when they're forced into a situation where they have to think about it, like, if there wasn't a war on drugs, or you're not dumb enough to call the police because you have a friend with an addiction problem, nobody says, well, I know, I'll point a machine gun in his face. Like, no. Almost nobody is that stupid, except cops. Say, all right, we don't want them to hurt other people, we don't want them to hurt themselves. How do we address this? Same thing with helping the poor, same thing with education, same thing with, you know, a zillion different problems. And the difference in the way people talk when the responsibility is on them, like, what would you do about this, is difference between night and day. Because when they talk about government solutions, they say things like, what would you do about this problem? There are some people who are sick and stuff and they can't afford health. Well, I want free health care. Well, I want rainbow unicorns sprinkling free money. What does that mean? Well, I want them to be given free stuff. From who? From all of, from the people, from government. Okay, where did government get it? They speak in fluff because they think in fluff, because if they don't, they feel bad about it. And one simple approach will make almost any statist uncomfortable, which is, if you actually advocate something, at least have the spine to say it. And just trying to get a statist to do that will make almost every one of them uncomfortable. Just get them to literally say what it is. Now, when people are responsible for their own actions, they don't do that. Like, for example, if I'm talking about somebody breaks in my house with an axe in the middle of the night, I'm going to shoot him. I'm not going to say, well, I will implement some deterrent policy that I think is approved. No, I will literally describe, I will shoot you if you are a threat to the life of me and my family. So why is it that whenever, when all the statists advocate government solutions, the one wrong answer to everything, they always speak in terms of fluff. And you say, oh, what do you want done with the poor? A grand total of 0 statists will give the first description as, I want men with guns to threaten violence against all those people, to force them to hand over money, and then give some of that to the poor. That is what every advocate of the welfare state condones and advocates, and it's what absolutely none of them will honestly admit, even to themselves. And that's the important part, because if you can bring it up to the surface to the point where they have to see it in themselves that, ooh, that really is the reality of it, then they get uncomfortable. One of the easiest ways to do that is when it comes to gun control. Gun control being a euphemism for gun violence, which most of us understand, and most of the people in the world will be like, what? No, gun violence is what we're against. Okay? You're against gun violence. So there I am in my home with my AR-15, not threatening anyone, not shooting anyone. In fact, it's in a safe. What do you want done to me? Well, there have to be consequences. Again, they do the tap dance. A half hour later, it suddenly dawns on them, gun control means sending men with guns into your living room to drag you away or shoot you because you have the same kind of gun as the guy I just asked to go into your living room to point a gun at you. Like, when it gets literal, nobody can say it with a straight face. And yet when it's not, when it's in the realm of fluff, there are so many peacenik leftists that feel perfectly fine about saying, I'm an advocate of gun control. Because they're unaware of the fact that what they're literally saying is, I'm an advocate of men with guns coming to you and threatening to kill you if you don't disarm. Oddly, none of them want to say it that way. And none of them want to think about it that way. Because they don't want to see the answer, the solution that they're actually advocating. The belief in government is a mental crutch. It's what we do to be lazy and irresponsible and stupid. Because if you think something is justified, you don't need to ask somebody else to do it. You might hire somebody, you might think, I have the right to do this, I have the right to mow my lawn, so I have the right to hire somebody else to do it. Every single person who votes for government, any size, any flavor, any kind, doesn't matter. Every single one. The reason they do that is because they want government to do things that they know would be immoral if they did them themselves. And that was absolutely true.
Yeah!
And on the other hand, if you think authoritarian power is legitimate, you are going to use it. You are going to cheer for the initiation of violence. If you think the ring of power is good and you're wearing it, it's like, well, now I get to be in charge, you're going to be a violent psycho. You can't not be. You cannot believe in government and not advocate immorality. You literally have to advocate immorality if you advocate government. And the reason they put so much fluff on top of describing what they condone is because deep down inside, part of them knows they're cheering for evil. And the little island exercise I use is one of my favorite ways to get people to think like adults. And what's very encouraging about those is that very quickly you'll see that most people, even if they're not all that educated, maybe they're not even all that smart, maybe they don't know each other, but they immediately go into the mode of, all right, well, how do we deal with this? How do we act as responsible adults? Because you've taken away the crutch. So, but I've walked my whole life on the crutch of authority will fix it. Well, too bad. Now you have to think like a grown-up. And just that exercise demonstrates the potential of humanity. Just trying that with people demonstrates these are people I could get along with really easily. We could peacefully coexist really easily if they hadn't been indoctrinated into believing in the one wrong answer to everything. So basically, to sum it up, what statism is being an irresponsible, irrational, immoral, bratty child. And it doesn't matter how many layers of fluffy rhetoric you use, it doesn't matter how nice your suit is, and how dishonest your rhetoric and spin is while you're describing the government violence you advocate. While anarchism, or more specifically voluntarism, is being a grown-up. It's recognizing, all right, I'm me, you're you, we shouldn't be, attacking each other. How do we figure this out? How do we deal with this? And it's necessarily uncomfortable. and it makes people want to run back to being caged animals. Animals that have grown up all their lives in a cage, a lot of them, if you open the cage, they'll like back away. I'm not going out there. That is humanity. Humanity is domesticated livestock that's been trained to fear freedom and instead believe in the stupidest answer to almost every problem. The indoctrination that people are bombarded with, which is just constant, not only has to legitimize authoritarian domination, it has to delegitimize voluntary cooperation and organization. So government has to try to convince people, you can't possibly care for the poor. There's so many of them, or you're just so greedy you're not going to do it. We have to come up with some reason why the sane, rational, moral answer isn't going to work, and they will insist to you that will never work. And we can't trust you to have guns to defend yourself. There would be shootouts in the street over every fender bender. Because you're all stupid, violent animals. You need us controlling you and giving these solutions and giving these answers because it would be chaos without us. So, a project that I'm just now completing is a little booklet called What Anarchy Isn't. And it's a little animated, or a little illustrated thing, full color. It's almost like a comic book. Very basic explanations that anybody can follow. It's like 40 pages, it's about this big. And it's made to mass produce and print a whole bunch of them so you can just hand it out and leave them lying around. One big benefit of that is as soon as you talk to somebody, if they feel like, oh, you're trying to talk me into something and your ideas sound weird, they're likely to try to put up a wall and get into an argument and stuff. Whereas if they just find something lying around, some little colorful thing like, wait, what the heck's this? Their mind is way more likely to be at least receptive enough to see, wait, what even is this? And it's a very, in one sense, it's sort of like a kindergarten explanation. Unfortunately, when it comes to philosophy, the whole world is basically at the kindergarten level because they've been taught such garbage and not allowed to actually think about things like self-ownership and non-aggression, which should be patently obvious to everybody. So they need it at that low level. So we're making these and spreading them around all over the place. If you want to find me afterwards, I have a thing with a QR code where you can scan it and you can see the entire contents of this little booklet thing and download it for free, and you can share the PDF. But we really want to make the printed version because I think that lying around all over the place, first of all, imagine you're one of the control freaks at the top and you know that thing's lying around, and one at a time your subjects are going to go, yeah, kind of sounds like what I want. Thought it was chaos and mayhem. Because, like I said, they have to legitimize their one really stupid answer and delegitimize the thousands of rational answers. And that main focus of trying to get people to think in terms of a central master plan is so key to it. Because again, that's getting people to think like irresponsible children. What is the teacher going to do about blah, 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 blah? And as long as they have a promise, don't worry, the teacher has a plan. Okay, then it's not my problem, it's not my responsibility, never mind. And so many statists, when they start to see the idea of a stateless society, they're like, but how would we do stuff? You're one of us. You're one of the people who has to figure out how we do stuff and gets to decide how we do stuff. And you get to decide what things you're going to support and how you're going to help your fellow man and how you're going to protect yourself or organize to protect other people or whatever it is. But the discomfort of being grown up makes a big disincentive for people to want to even think about it because they've been trained to be domesticated livestock. But it's so important just to point out that the foundation of statism and authoritarianism really is as ridiculous and insane as my silly little skits that I started this with. It really is that ridiculous. When people advocate any government solution, they really are advocating having a small number of people with the right to violently dominate and rob the rest of us. That is the literal reality of it. And just getting people to see that which is a huge challenge. But if you can just get people to see that, you'll start to get them to see that government is the one wrong answer to absolutely everything.